Welcome to Hamburgers and Horror, the home of meat, monsters, and murderous cannibals hoping to chop you up. I'm Noah Hook, and today we're looking at Texas Chainsaw 3D.
That's right. Do your thing, cuz.
Carnage here. Can't get around a good book.
Welcome to Texas, motherfucker!
This 2013 slasher primarily takes place 40 years after the events of the original TCM film, following a long-lost Sawyer after the murderous clan was nearly decimated in the 70s. She learns about her cannibalistic lineage and inherits a beautiful home from her secret Sawyer grandma, so she and a group of friends travel to Texas to check out the new digs. Only trouble is that the town is still filled with the murderous vigilantes that killed most of her family, and the skin-wearing sole survivor of that massacre is living in the basement. Will Heather help the town take down Leatherface for good, or will she embrace her heritage and pick up a saw of her own? 3D is the 7th film in the Texas Chainsaw franchise, and it's the first to truly take the direct sequel to the original route. This franchise has already been a mess so far, but basically you can break the different timelines down like this. You've got the first 4 films, which are technically considered one continuous story. Parts 3 and 4 have very little relation to the first 2 though, so you could easily consider them reboots or standalone films. We just went through the 2 remake films, which are of course their own unique timeline and don't relate to the other movies. But 3D marks another timeline that does tie back to the original, but it ignores 2, 3, and 4. So this version of Leatherface did kill Franklin, but he's never been to Nomland or worked with the Illuminati. It's kind of like the same deal with the newest Halloween trilogy that ties back to the original, but ignores 2, 3, 4, and all the fucking rest of them. Makes sense? Maybe? Good enough. Platinum Dunes originally planned to follow up the beginning with a 3rd film to complete the trilogy, but for whatever reason they decided to sell the rights of the franchise to Lionsgate. They brought in John Lucenhop of films like Takers and Speed Kills to direct, as well as husband and wife team Adam Marcus and Deborah Sullivan to write the screenplay. You probably know Marcus best as the director of Jason Goes to Hell. This new batch of murder victims is played by Alexandra Daddario from White Lotus as Heather Miller, aka Sawyer, rapper Trey Songz for some fucking reason as her cheating boyfriend Ryan, Tanya Raymond from Deep Blue Sea 3, didn't know that existed, as Nikki, and Karam Maliki Sanchez from American History X as Kenny. We also meet a bunch of Sawyers this time around, both in flashbacks and in the present. Dan Yeager from Sharknado 4 takes the lead as Leatherface, but it also allows Marilyn Burns, Gunnar Hansen, John Dugan, and Bill Moseley to play small roles as well. Cinematography was handled by Anastas Mikos of The Empty Man and The First Purge, and the score was composed by John Frizzle of Alien Resurrection and 13 Ghosts. Texas Chainsaw 3D hit theaters in 2013 before going to DVD and Blu-ray, and it was largely met with negative reviews. Most found the 3D element underused or silly, the dialogue absolutely atrocious, the decision to make Leatherface sort of an anti-hero bizarre, and the convoluted nature of the timeline and inappropriate casting too hard to look past. It currently has a 20 and 40% on Rotten Tomatoes, along with a 2.1 on Letterboxd, placing it near the bottom of this franchise. The only people I know who love this film love it in a so bad it's good kind of way. They view it as more of a comedy than anything else. I try to be pretty positive, or at least neutral, in this first part of my videos before I start dogging on the film, but y'all deserve to know upfront I think this movie is mostly ass. It's poorly written, poorly casted, poorly acted, kind of shitty looking, and it's just kind of a weird and boring direction to take the story, in my opinion. I do think it has some solid kills and practical effects, and the intro is pretty solid though, so it's not all bad. But you can expect an extra dose of sarcasm, criticism, and jokes while I go through the plot today. But hey, with all that said, it's probably time we get started. Welcome to Texas, motherfucker! Because we're watching Texas Chainsaw 3D. The movie opens with some edited footage of the original film as sole survivor Sally Hardesty tells the police about her terrifying encounter with the Sawyer family. It goes through all the highlights of the first film, so if you somehow watched this without seeing the original, you would probably think you're walking into a great film. We pick up just moments after Sally's narrow escape in 1973 as Sheriff Hooper, yes that's an obvious nod to Toby, rushes to the crime scene. This movie has a lot of shortfalls, but I do want to acknowledge how good of a job the set designers did in recreating the house from the original. It looks awesome. Hooper calls out to Drayton, now played by Bill Moseley, and tells him to bring his son Jed, aka Leatherface, outside to be arrested. But here, the Sawyer family is much bigger than we saw in the original, with a small brigade of heavily armed rednecks ready to fight. One old-timer played by OG Leatherface actor Gunnar Hansen convinces Drayton to give up Leatherface, but plans change when a lynch mob arrives. This is the Hartman family, who apparently have a long-time feud with the Sawyers. We'll learn a bit about that in the next movie.
Yeah, you can start by getting everybody back in their cars and hightailing it out of here. That ain't gonna happen. Let's go, boys. Let's eat some bitch.
Under the orders of leader Bert, this fella named Ollie eats a couple Molotovs into the home to set it ablaze. This starts an all-out gunfight that absolutely decimates the Sawyers, with Boss, Grandpa, and Drayton being killed. The mob pillages the pile of ashes for body parts and body part removers, although a man named Gavin finds a wounded young mother named Loretta and her baby hiding behind a nearby car. He takes the baby and murders Loretta with a forceful kick. We get a good long look at some Sawyer family swag she's wearing, learning that the S mark has been burned onto the baby girl's chest. The mob commemorates this moment with a group photo alongside the charred remains. Now we jump to 2012 to meet the surviving Sawyer baby. I'm sorry, maybe this is the daughter of that baby? No? This is apparently supposed to be a 40-year-old woman. Yeah, the math is not mathing. This forever young woman is Heather, and despite not knowing her lineage, it seems to have shaped her career and taste in art. A steamy makeout sesh with boyfriend Ryan is interrupted by a letter, which states that Heather's grandmother has passed away. Her so-called parents reveal some of the truth to her, saying they rescued her from a shit heap. Technically that's true, but you left out some important details, Gavin. She's bound and determined to learn where she comes from, so Ryan, as well as Heather's best friend Nikki and her boyfriend Kenny, agree to let her stop in Newt, Texas during their pre-planned trip to New Orleans. On the way, they pick up a hitchhiker named Daryl, which is always a mistake in this franchise. The crew arrives at the armadillo-ridden town the next day, and Heather meets with a man named Farnsworth. He was Grandma Verna's lawyer, and he's nervous to see she brought friends. He hands over the keys, the deed, and a very special letter from Verna that she should read ASAP. She doesn't. So, it also turns out Grandma Verna was loaded, so Heather is now the owner of a mansion. The crew parties while Heather explores the big ol' family cemetery, which is a good time for me to explain the family lineage early since it's a bit confusing. Alright, so we've of course got Grandpa Sawyer. In this timeline, he had a son named Boss, the older fella from the intro. Boss is the father of Verna and Drayton, with the latter being the father of Nubbins and Jed, aka Leatherface. Verna is the mother of Loretta, who is the mother of Heather. It's a bit unclear on the Texas Chainsaw Wiki, but it also might be the case that Drayton and Verna are the respective parents of all these kids, so they may have just been having an incestual relationship this whole time. But at some point, Verna marries a man named Ben Carson, hence the different last name. But regardless, this means that Heather and Leatherface are cousins. And we'll get to know some of these characters a bit better in the 2017 prequel as well. But for right now, Heather knows none of this because her dumbass didn't read the letter. She's also dumbass enough to head to the grocery store with everyone but Daryl, allowing the stranger to ransack the place for anything valuable. He comes across a hidden door leading to the servant quarters, at the end of which is a big old door for the big old key on the chain. It of course has a metal sliding door, but before Daryl can open it, he's jumped by Leatherface and gets his head bashed in. While at the grocery store, we learn that Ryan and Nikki had a little fling recently, and while she's hoping to keep it going, he's trying to be faithful to his recently rich girlfriend. We'll see how that goes. Heather meets a flirty young officer named Carl, along with the town's mayor, who of course is none other than Bert Hartman. He catches word that she's a Sawyer and has inherited the Carson estate, and he's disappointed that she isn't willing to sell it to him. They return to see that Daryl robbed the place, but they assume he's long gone and press on with their celebration anyways. Heather discovers the origin of her so-called birthmark in some family photos, and Kenny is the next one to discover the servants' quarters. He too gets jumped by Leatherface and stabbed with a meat hook. Meanwhile, Nikki has lured Ryan into the barn for some sexy shots, and to nobody's surprise, he's unable to resist. Next, Heather comes across Grandma Verna, who was apparently dug up by Leatherface. She runs downstairs to find Leatherface preparing some finger foods, and he proceeds to knock her out and bring her downstairs. She wakes just in time to watch Bubba cut Kenny in half. Nice. She makes a fast but somewhat clumsy run for her life, opting to hide in Grandma's dug-up casket. It doesn't work. This gets the attention of Ryan and Nikki, who foolishly call the killer their way. Nikki arms up with a shotgun and a terrible one-liner.
Welcome to Texas, motherfucker!
But she manages to temporarily ward off Leatherface. The trio escape in the van, but scared-ass Ryan tries and fails to plow through the wrought iron gate. This gives Leatherface enough time to catch up, and he manages to saw a tire with impeccable success. The crash actually kills Ryan, which is realistic but kind of lame, and Leather uses his big boy strength to launch another attack on the ladies. Heather leads Leather on a woodland chase, which takes us to a previously mentioned carnival. I love that this version of Leatherface has so much tunnel vision that he can overlook hundreds of people, even a Jigsaw cosplayer, to hunt down his prey. She eventually finds herself trapped on a fucking Ferris wheel, but fortunately Deputy Carl serves as a super 3D distraction. Okay, bye! He takes Heather back to the station and introduces her to Hooper, who is somehow still sheriff of this blood-soaked town. The boys are horrified to learn that this masked man was living inside the Carson estate all this time, as well as what his mask was made of. Mayor Hartman shows up and Hooper shares that Jed Sawyer may have survived the fire after all. An officer named Marvin arrives at the scene and notices a blood trail leading into the house, and despite Hooper's concern, Hartman orders him to check it out. Meanwhile, the dumbass officers left a big-ass file on the Sawyer family with Heather, giving her all the history she needs to know that they are up to no good. But also that her family are murderous cannibals and probably deserved what they got. But when you see photos of your burnt-up mom, it's kind of hard to see the other side's perspective, I guess. Marvin provides Hartman and Hooper with a live stream of his house tour, virtually leading them down to Leatherface's dungeon. He comes across the remains of Daryl, Kenny, and Ryan, and Hartman tells him to open the freezer. Oh shit, that sucks. Marvin flees upstairs, only to get fucked up by Leatherface with a hatchet. Bubba removes the still living man's face, also confirming that he was the same officer present at the Sawyer slaughter. He also takes a moment to permanently attach his mask to his face. Okay. Hartman wants to burn the Carson place to the ground and kill every last Sawyer there is, and he's pissed to see that one has just escaped his clutches. Heather calls up Farnsworth and meets him at a bar where he lays out all the info we already know. Verna introduced him to Jed shortly before she passed, and it turns out she kept tabs on Heather for her entire life. Jed was actually expecting her, but in all the chaos, he probably thought she was just some trespasser. He also warns that Bert won't stop until Jed and herself are eliminated. Hey, speak of the devil and he shall appear. Heather flees as Farnsworth ever so slightly slows him down, and she slashes his henchman Ollie when he tries to capture her. She flags down Deputy Carl for help, but to absolutely nobody's surprise, Carl is a bad guy. He's actually Bert's son, so killing Sawyers is in his blood. Dad tells him to take her out to the old slaughterhouse, which Leather just so happens to hear over Marvin's radio. Farnsworth warns Hooper that Hartman has kidnapped her, so he gives chase as well. Carl drags her through ye old slaughterhouse until he finds a suitable place to string her up. He heads out so his dad can do the dirty work, and we actually never see him again, but it's actually Jed who finds her first. He's all ready to chop her up, at least until he spots that swagged out Sawyer S on her chest.
It's me! It's Heather! It's your cousin!
Hey, what's up, fam? He frees Heather before Bert and Ollie start beating him up, but as Heather flees, she decides she can't leave her cousin behind. The boys wrap a chain around his neck and drag him towards an industrial meat grinder. Heather manages to sneak attack Ollie with a pitchfork, and then she yeets the chainsaw over to Leatherface with the single most iconic line in this entire fucking franchise.
Do your thing, cuz.
Bubba, in fact, does his thing, cutting through both of Bert's ankles. Hooper arrives and draws his gun, but the sheriff has had enough of Hartman's carnage and allows Leatherface to sacrifice him to the CGI meat grinder. Okay, bye! The cousins limp on home, and despite Jedediah being cautious, he seems to accept her as his new roommate. She finally reads that damn letter, in which Verna shares that Heather's real name is Edith. She reburies her grandmother and prepares to take on a new role as Leatherface's caretaker to end the movie. And that's Texas Chainsaw 3D. Yeah, this one's a bit of a stinker. I've been trying to come up with a more articulate way to describe my feelings on this film, but at the moment the best word I can use is dumb. It's not even that the whole movie is bad and dumb and not worth watching, but there's a lot of dumb decisions that shoot the movie in the foot before it can even get going. For me, the most obvious is that Alexandra Daddario just has no business being anywhere near this franchise. It's not even a matter of her acting skills. I think in the right scenario, she could play a fine, non-Sawyer final girl or even just character in this franchise. But the actual character of Heather is just really poorly written, and I think it's poorly acted and not very thought out. This woman is supposed to be 40. Why the fuck are we watching this group of 20-somethings? It's just simple math and such a stupid thing to get wrong. Like, I get that 40-year-olds maybe don't have the same sex appeal, but y'all are the ones who decided to jump 40 years into the future. And I already know this movie's few and far between champions are gonna say, oh, it's such an easy thing to overlook and people like me just don't like to have any fun. But fuck that. I should not have to look over a movie's blatant lack of care and attention to enjoy it. And one of the things that's so confusing to me is that you could almost make the argument that this movie takes place in the 90s, so her age would actually make sense, because there's almost no cell phones or contemporary technology in this movie. We literally never see any of the main characters holding or using or talking on a cell phone. And honestly, Kenny looks like he's straight out of the 90s. But that idea goes out the window when that cop literally live streams his journey through the Carson estate. Heather was raised by these redneck murderers that massacred her entire family, yet she's somehow completely well adjusted socially, and prior to meeting Leatherface, she has zero signs of being a psycho only for her to decide to embrace her skin-wearing cousin that quite literally murdered her friends just minutes ago. It would be like if in Halloween 2, Laurie Strode learns Michael is her brother and decides to join up with him and take on the town of Haddonfield. It makes just no sense. It's also almost like when Daenerys in the final season of Game of Thrones just all of a sudden goes full batshit crazy. Like there were inklings of it, but it just happened way too quick and way too quick to justify. Another big issue is this movie is clearly shot on a bunch of cheap sets. Just look at all these boring static shots of characters talking to each other in boring ass rooms. Without the audio, it just looks like shitty daytime television. And even disregarding Heather's involvement in it, I just find this small town family feud bullshit so uninteresting. Like we already have this iconic, really cool, really zany, really interesting cannibal family. Why kill them off and replace them with this way less interesting, boring redneck family? There have been a few films in this franchise where Leatherface isn't a straightforward bad guy, but turning him into some kind of anti-hero is just dumb. I'm sorry y'all, I'm just trashing this poor movie, but I feel it's deserved. Literally seeing my favorite film of all time paired with this is just so disappointing. I also have no idea how and why someone greenlit a prequel to a movie this bad, but that's a discussion for next time. But, to be fair, the movie isn't all bad. The recreation of the Sawyer house actually looks really good, and it's nice to get a little more time with Drayton and the other family members. And these are probably my favorite cameos from the OG cast. They're definitely way better than the ones we got in the next gen. Leatherface also looks pretty good here, and the kills that aren't CGI look solid as well. There's some great effects by K&B in here. Damn, I was writing out the positives, and that's actually where my list ended. I think those are the only genuinely good things I can say about this one. That's unfortunate. But 3D does have a lot of so bad it's good quality for me. Some of it's purposeful and some of it's not, but I can usually find something to smile or chuckle about throughout the film. I'm not just having a purely miserable time watching this. I mean, the dialogue alone is so bad most of the time, I can't take anything too seriously. It's a dumb, somewhat fun popcorn flick that you can throw on with some friends and have a good enough time with. But that being said, I would say this is right there competing with number 4 as the worst Texas Chainsaw film that we've covered so far. But I actually feel like I might prefer part 4 over this because it at least has a weird fucking personality to it. For me, 3D just lacks any artistic merit. The previous films, even the worst of them, at least feel like somebody's passion project, and you can feel that coming through on screen. This just feels like a bland studio production, and that's because it really is. According to Adam Marcus, the producers had a fair amount of changes that significantly changed the story that he wrote. I honestly didn't look into it that far to confirm if it's true or how much of it was ultimately changed, but the point is that it feels like that's the case when I watch the film. Honestly, it feels like a spec script that they just tossed Leatherface into last minute. I can literally see a room full of producers going through ideas and oh, we have this lady who realizes she's the descendant of serial killers and she joins up with the family and goes crazy with them. Oh, that's neat. Oh, well, we got the rights to the Texas Chainsaw franchise. Let's throw Leatherface in there. I think this film, as well as the 2022 film we'll be covering soon, proves that Leatherface does not work as well on his own. He needs his crazy, zany, abusive family to give him some support. Without them, he's just another silent slasher with little to make him stand out. All in all, I think Texas Chainsaw 3D is lacking the gritty Texas vibes and the maniacal family members, and it's too busy building out decades worth of boring lore to focus on a compelling story that happens in the present. It definitely has its fair share of funny, violent, and gory moments, so if you just want to see Leatherface hack people up, you can't go too wrong with this one. It also pays a lot of homage to the original film, and if you've been wishing for a Texas Chainsaw film that is more storytelling and narratively driven, you may get more out of this than me. But I'm sorry to say, it's a film I don't enjoy, and I never feel compelled to watch it outside of a series binge like I'm going through right now. There are better films in this franchise, more violent and gritty films in this franchise, and better so bad they're good type movies in this franchise, as well as the whole backwoods hillbilly subgenre. So there's just never really the right time for me to put this movie on and get something really unique out of it. Well, that's about it. What do y'all think of Texas Chainsaw 3D though? Do you disagree with my shitting on it? If you enjoy this movie, please let me know and tell me some of the things you like about it. I'm always open to a discussion. I usually follow up each franchise review with a patron request, but actually the next movie we're going to be looking at is the 2017 prequel to this, Leatherface. I don't want to spoil the next patron request, but let's just say it's pretty long and involved, so I'm going to need a little extra time on it. I'm going to have to really sink my teeth into it. So be sure to join me in 2 weeks as we check out Leatherface. Thank you all so much for joining me, and an extra thank you to my patrons. As always, I'm Noah Hook, and thanks so much for watching Hamburgers and Horror. Stay safe out there. Thanks for watching my review of Texas Chainsaw 3D. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe so you can keep up with all my horror reviews. And if you want to help support the channel further, be sure to check out my Patreon account. You'll be able to vote for future movies and franchises I cover on the channel. Thanks y'all.